Welcome to the Bible in History. I'm Jeff Johnson. With me today is my mother, Rebecca Johnson.
Hey, how are you?
Today we're going to be talking about the Ark.
Yes.
And all the stuff about that. A lot of controversy about this. Obviously, it's a very disputed point of the Bible. So we're going to try to help clear up some misunderstandings about that.
Right.
I'm going to begin reading Genesis 7, verses 1 and 2. It says, "And the Lord said unto Noah, Come thou and all thy house into the ark. For thee have I seen righteous before me in this generation. Of every clean beast thou shalt take to thee by sevens, the male and his female, and of beasts that are not clean by two, the male and his female."
Yes. So, that's been one of the problems that people have had with the ark is, how did all the animals fit? Is it even possible? And, again, if you've ever been to the Ark Encounter in Kentucky, you will realize that the ark was much larger than what we have been led to believe throughout history.
Yes.
A lot of what we have perceived has come from artwork done for children's books, quite frankly.
Yeah. Most of any art you see for the ark
Right.
is really for children.
Yes.
There's nothing adult. There's nothing realistic except for creation.
Exactly.
A museum.
Exactly. And what is it? It's always that tiny little boat, and all the animals are like upside down, and they're sticking their heads out. And looks
You usually have a woodpecker eating away at the wood, like stuff like that.
So, okay, that is not a realistic image of the ark. The ark was a massive ship, as we've talked about. But an interesting thing is that God specifically said kind, not animal. It's interesting because that brings the number down quite a bit. Let me give you an example. A dog is a kind, but in the dog kind, there are 190 registered breeds with the American Kennel Club. So Noah didn't need 190 dogs. He needed 2 of the dog kind. And that brings our number way down. We tend to look at it from our perspective. There are 190 dogs registered with the American Kennel Club, so there were 190 dogs on the ark. No, we bred out 190 different breeds from the dog kind, and that is important to know for sure. And also, I feel like both Noah and God had enough common sense to bring baby animals.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah.
If you look,
it's a lot easier to care for a baby than it is an adult. You need less space.
Yes.
You need less food and all this kind of stuff.
And they sleep
you
a
can just
lot.
Let them nap for forever.
Yes. So it would make more sense as well after the flood to have juveniles, because their breeding span would be much longer. Mm-hmm. Whereas an adult's breeding span is already coming down to a limited number of years. So the idea that he brought on a full-sized sauropod is ridiculous.
Yeah, no.
He would have brought a baby or even eggs.
Yeah. Especially for those creatures that just do the eggs, birds and different things, reptiles and stuff like that. It's a lot easier to just grab a bunch of eggs right before the flood.
Right. And you have a year to raise them.
Wait. And you just have like a cabinet full of eggs, and you get out, and it's like, oh, now they're hatched. There you go.
And I know...
No care needed.
Yeah, that's true. And I know some people are like, oh, well, they wouldn't have had the capabilities. Well, that is where, again, we're wrong. We talked about the advanced societies pre-flood. Mm-hmm. He would have had access to growth lights and things. And we know about Tesla's energy. We've talked... Tesla is awesome because the energy, and we're going to talk about him a lot more in the future. But free energy So while there wouldn't need to be wires and things in the walls of the ark, there could have been electricity. So there could have even been grow lamps if needed. We don't think about that kind of stuff, but it was a possibility. Because the ark was wood, we tend to just put them as some kind of half 8-man structure, barely getting
very
along.
Primitive society.
And part of that comes from the 120-year span. I don't think that the 120 years was all just ark building. You had crop planting and seed gathering. You've had animal gathering. And frankly, you have 120 years of mercy and preaching. So there's that.
Yeah. I personally believe the 120 years was specifically for the preaching and trying to get people onto the ark. It wasn't about building the ark. That ark was built within a decade, max. I'd give it probably a year based on what I believe to be their taking. A year to build this ark, you know, maybe 2. The 120 years was just to get people saved. Right. And we talked about that later, so I won't rant about that again. But the ark was not for the animals, but it was also very easy to take care of them with all that they had. It's. I think we underestimate 120 years and the amount of preparation you can do in that amount of time, and 2,000 years worth of learning.
Yes.
And practice.
Another thing that people are very confused about was, well, what did the animals eat? You'd have to have like 7 pairs of rabbits to breed fast so all the meat eaters could eat, except they were all herbivores. We talked about this. When God created everything, he didn't create it with destruction, and that means they were not eating meat. They were eating plants.
And it's a lot easier to prepare that and store that. It's just a bunch of grain, maybe some grass, different types of grass, some rice, different things like that, fruits and vegetables and things like that. So it was very easy. And you just have one big fruit cabinet or whatever. You don't have to breed animals to feed the carnivores at the time because they didn't become carnivores until after the flood.
So you get the animals in their confined areas. It would make sense to put animals that hibernate in the lower floor of the ark, which would be underwater, so it would be dark and cold, which imitates the situation in which they would be hibernating. So you have a large amount of animals asleep. And asleep means less food and less care. But also, the use of bamboo. Bamboo is a practical choice because it reserves. It's resistant to urine, the corrosiveness of urine. So if you put that as the tubing under cages, you can easily clean away the waste from the animals and the humans, frankly. God gave a general description. He did not get into the specifics of how the cages should be built, of how all of this should happen. And so there are people who've done research on this and some of the ideas that could come up. For example, there's the option, a possibility, because it was found in ships after the flood. So where did they learn it from? Possibly from Noah.
And we do have to remember when we get into this, a lot of these things are based off of ships that came after, which would most likely have been based off of the Ark. And so when you look at the Creation Museum and the Ark Encounter, their design is based off of ships. I think it's the Roman triremes and stuff. Different ships that came after it that would have taken influence from the ship's design, ship's interior, different things like that. And so you have to remember, these are all opinions, yes, but we believe they're well-founded. They're well-based off of what came after.
For example, let's talk about some of the basic stuff. If you put the animal next to the food source it needs most, number one, it's efficient. And things like we could take grasses and leaves, mash them into pellet forms, and store them in ceramic containers so they're waterproofed and last forever. So it's like a high protein pellet. That is something that's been done. It could have been done at the time. They could have made like jellies out of fruits, because fruits can rot, but once you preserve them in a jelly form, they last quite a bit longer. So for animals who needed that. So there's a lot of different choices in the way you could feed your animals. Then you have the waste, of course. If you have worms in solid waste, it breaks down into a nutrient-rich soil in a process called vermicomposting. Composting. Quite get that out.
Composting,
composting.
I like saying that word.
Another idea that's been put out there, because it was found in certain ships, was the moon pool. So
it's a very interesting
love the
design.
idea of the moon pool, because the moon pool would have helped with multiple things. One, it would have helped with waste disposal, because it's an open shaft in the center of the ship, maybe off more towards the end, but centralized inside the body. It would allow waves to come up and down in it, pushing air through, which would have given you air circulation. Remember, God did tell them to put a window at the top of the ark, not in any other spot, but in the top.
And there was only one window.
So with the moon pool helping, pushing the air up and down within the shaft, it would force stale air to circulate through the ship, through that one window. So between the moon pool and the window, you've got.
And you'd want that with that many animals and the length of time you're in there, things are going to start stinking up. So you would want something to get that air circulating and get that nasty air out and that fresh rain air, if you will, and whatever in to keep it smelling. So.
Then people have, they couldn't have stored water for a year. So it was raining the whole time. So we're going to collect that water.
Yeah, and the rain coming down makes it very easy, because you get the rain from the top, and then you just create your systems to go down into the various compartments and whatever, and you have an automatic watering system. You don't have to lug the water everywhere. You don't have to, get all that weight. You just let it go, and you put in a few systems that are very easy to make, and it's automatic watering for all the animals. You don't have to do anything, and I can see that as a win.
Absolutely, and actually, they've recently discovered that if you put the right plants. In fact, Prince Charles in England has done this with his own water system at his house. Sandringham House. It is not treated by a company. He treats his own water with plants. So someone might be saying, but it's polluted water. If they had it go through the God-made filtration system of nature that God put in place, they wouldn't need a chemical factory to treat the water. And in fact, it's healthier for you. So the water would have been quite clean. So, I think the biggest problem with the idea of Noah's Ark is that we put him in some kind of prehistoric box of ideas.
Definitely. We really take away any kind of technology, any kind of learning that this man could have given. Like, this man, I can't remember how old he was, but he was a few hundred years old. Like, he spent 120 years just in the process of making this thing, and when he started, he already had 3 kids. Like, this man's centuries old, and we really think he can't figure out how to take care of animals and set up some kind of basic water filtration and different things in 120 years.
Guys.
Like, really?
Yes.
Really? Are we really dumbing down and he also had a much more involved brain. When Adam was created,
Yes.
he was a lot smarter and a lot more intelligent than we are. Our brains are devolving, are decaying. He had a much greater mental capacity than we do. And we're like, nah, he couldn't make this ship.
Yes.
Like, what?
Yes.
That doesn't make sense.
And the other thing about the ark is that, quite frankly, there would have been plenty of room for every kind of animal on earth. Kind, not speed, not 190 dogs, the dog kind. And there would have been plenty of room for people. The truth is that I feel like probably the entire top 4 and more was dedicated to human space. God was wanting them to come.
Yeah.
And yet no one came. I think there was food prepared for hundreds and thousands of people. I think that there was living space prepared for thousands of people, because frankly the animals didn't need to stretch out. They were fine in their cages.
No.
It was a temporary situation.
Yeah.
And I think predominantly that ark was built for humans. And yet they didn't come.
Definitely. And I think it was a very empty place in the end. Once that door was closed, that thing was empty. And there wasn't anything around. It was a very quiet, very somber place. Because it had been designed for humans and not the animals. The animals took a very small portion on the lower floors. This thing was deserted.
It was an amazing tragedy, and we wonder about if you're interested in knowing more about what the ark has. Go to Answers in Genesis. They have so many books on the subject. I couldn't even begin to cover all the books they have are lots for children. They have them for teenagers. They have them for adults. Very clearly explained and well illustrated, and I highly recommend you invest for your home. But why didn't anyone listen? It was such an amazing thing that no one listened, and yet we talked about the possible advancements at the time. And
they were very advanced, and they were very.
One wonders if God did not specifically want the ark, quote, out of wood, just to baffle people. God uses the foolish things to confound the wise. And if they did have flight capability, if they were in fact at a nuclear level of weaponry, one guy, crazy nut, building a wooden boat when you're flying around would have been quite shocking. And we have to think about that. We talked about the population of the earth being so high. They had a way to hear his sermon. And they didn't listen. And that's the saddest thing of all. And so if you haven't accepted Christ, please don't miss the boat. Don't be like the people in Noah's day. For sure.
There is coming a day when there's no more time. And like the door on the ark closed, the door to heaven will close, and you can't get there anymore. There's no more accepting Christ. There's no more wandering around. There's no more double guessing. You're gonna have a day where it's the end, and if you're not saved, it's going to be a very sad day. And a very painful day.
Next time we're going to talk specifically about the flood. It's going to be great. I don't think people quite understand exactly how incredible this event was. Even Christians. It's going to be fun.
We'll get into that a lot. There's a lot to it that we don't think about. And we're going to try to dive into that and what the flood was really like and all that stuff. So join us next week. We'll be excited to have you with us. If you have any questions about any of this stuff, you can email us at thebibleinhistory@gmail.com. We'd love to hear about that. And then for any of you who are not saved, I'm going to have the salvation, the gospel story in the description below. So read that, and if you can, accept Christ as your Savior, and then email us at the same email. We'd love to hear about that. So join us next week. We'll look forward to seeing you there.
If you enjoyed today's video, please like and subscribe to our channel.
You can also follow us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Audible, and Google Podcasts.